Ma'am, this is for actual business owners, not whatever you are. Naomi Rivers sits in a faded hoodie and scuffed sneakers across from banker Garrett Whitfield's mahogany desk. Her loan application lies untouched between them. 20 pages of financial projections neatly bound in clear plastic. Garrett doesn't even glance at it. Instead, he opens his desk drawer and slides a crumpled McDonald's job application across the polished surface. Maybe start here first. Work your way up. His laugh cuts through the marble-columned lobby, loud enough for other customers to turn and stare. He picks up his coffee mug and swivels his leather chair away from her. Linda, yeah, it's Garrett. Still on for golf Saturday. His voice carries the casual confidence of a man who's never been told no. As Naomi stands to leave, papers scatter from her folder. Black American Express Centurion card hits the floor alongside a boarding pass marked first class. She quickly gathers them. Despite the public humiliation. Garrett remains on his call. Back turned. But what this banker did know about the woman he just destroyed would end his career in 72 hours. Stay with me to see the single phone call that changed everything. The humiliation began 15 minutes earlier. Naomi had walked into Meridian Trust 2:30 p.m. Exactly 2:30 p.m. Clutching the appointment confirmation. The marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Oil paintings of dead white men in suits lined the walls. The bank's founding fathers from 1896. She approached the reception desk where a blonde woman in pearls barely looked up from her manicure. I'm here to see Garrett Whitfield. 2:30 appointment. I'm here to see Garrett Whitfield. The receptionist's eyes swept over Naomi's casual outfit. Are you sure you have the right bank, hun? Practice disdain. There's a check cashing place down the street. Are you sure you have the right bank? Naomi's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed level. There's a check cashing place down the street. Acquisition loan. Naomi's jaw tightened. A pause, but her voice stayed reluctant, typing on the keyboard. I'm here about a business acquisition. He'll call you when he's ready. 2.3 million. 27 minutes pass. Then reluctant typing on the keyboard. Other clients, all white, all in expensive suits, will call you when he's ready. We're seen immediately. A man in a Rolex who arrived after her. Other clients, got whisked straight to Whitfield's office. Suits. Finally, her name was called. A man in a Rolex who arrived after her, got a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her name was called. His office Garrett Whitfield stood 6 feet leather-bound books tailored navy suit that probably cost more than most family photos on Martha's Vineyard. His office gestured to the chair across from his desk without offering a handshake. A Yale diploma. So Naomi Rivers, family photos, mispronounced her first name despite it being he gestured to the chair across from his desk without offering a handshake. What kind of business are we talking about here? So Naomi Rivers, the loan application across his desk. He mispronounced her first name despite it being clearly written on the final phase of an acquisition. What target kind of business are we talking about here? $8.3 billion in assets. She slid the loan application. Garrett's eyebrows shot up. I need bridge financing for the final phase of an acquisition. He didn't touch the application. The target company has $8.3 billion in assets. I think there might be some confusion. Garrett's eyebrows shot up. Our minimum loan amount for business acquisitions is $5 million. He didn't touch the application. Documentation, credit history. I think there might be some collateral verification. Our minimum loan amount for business. Naomi nodded toward the untouched folder, and that requires extensive. He leaned back in his chair. Credit history, collateral verification. Your credit profile doesn't match. Naomi nodded toward the untouched folder. Meridian Trust has served established families and businesses for over a century. We have certain expectations. Your credit profile doesn't match. Hung in the air like poison gas. Meridian Trust has served established families and businesses for over a century. For instance, our typical clients don't shop at. Words hung in the air like poison gas. He gestured vaguely at her hoodie. Target. In the corner of her vision, Naomi noticed something. A young black woman at the customer service counter had her phone angled toward Garrett's office. The red recording dot blinked steadily. Naomi kept her expression neutral. And if I met your dress code requirements, ma'am, this isn't about clothing. It's about fit, cultural fit. You understand? The recording continued. The young woman, college-aged, probably a student banking customer, had positioned herself perfectly to capture both audio and video through the glass partition. That's when Garrett opened his desk drawer and produced the McDonald's application. The crumpled paper landed between them with a soft thud that somehow echoed louder than his earlier laughter. Maybe start here first, work your way up. The girl with the phone shifted slightly, getting a better angle. Her expression showed she was witnessing something she knew was wrong. One of those real-life stories that would later become part of the broader narrative about systemic discrimination in banking. Naomi Rivers had experienced plenty of racism in her 42 years, but this moment crystallized something different. This wasn't just personal prejudice. This was institutional gatekeeping, designed to preserve power structures that had existed since the bank's founding. She thought about her father, civil rights lawyer James Rivers, who had been denied a mortgage at this same bank in 1987. The memory sharpened her focus. As Garrett swiveled his chair away to take his golf call, dismissing her like an annoying interruption to his day, Naomi made a decision that would alter the trajectory of both their lives. She gathered her papers slowly, including the items that had scattered. The Centurion card felt heavy in her palm, not because of its titanium construction, but because of what it represented. 10 minutes later, she sat in her rental car outside the bank. The young woman who'd been recording approached her window. "Excuse me, I got that whole thing on video. It was completely racist. You want me to post it?" Naomi looked at the earnest face of someone who believed social media could change the world, someone young enough to think viral videos were the most powerful weapon against injustice. "What's your name?" "Kesha. I go to Howard. I bank here because it's close to campus." "But after what I just saw?" She shook her head. "Post it, Kesha. But first, send me a copy." Naomi handed her a business card. Plain white, simple text, NR Capital Management. As she drove away, Naomi reached for her phone and dialed a number from memory. "Davies, it's Naomi. I need you to accelerate the Meridian acquisition full position. How quickly can we move?" The voice on the other end, her chief legal counsel, sounded surprised. "We're still in due diligence." "I thought you wanted to wait until Q3. Plans change. I want controlling interest by Friday." "That's ambitious. May I ask what's driving the urgency?" Naomi glanced back at the bank in her rearview mirror, where Garrett Whitfield was probably still on his golf call, completely unaware that his world was about to collapse. Let's call it a business opportunity. Keisha's video went live at 6:47 p.m. She'd titled it simply, "Racist Banker at Meridian Trust gives Black Woman McDonald's application instead of business loan banking while Black Meridian Trust." The 43-second clip showed everything. Garrett's dismissive body language, his mispronunciation of Naomi's name, the McDonald's application sliding across the desk, his loud performative phone call while she gathered her dignity from the floor. By 8:30 p.m., the video had 15,000 views. Real-life stories of being judged, dismissed, humiliated in banks, mortgage offices, investment firms across the country. "This happened to me at Wells Fargo. Same energy at Bank of America. When I tried to get a small business loan, they told me I should try the urban branch across town." At 2:17 a.m., the bank's overnight security called the crisis management team. The video had been shared 8,000 times and tagged the bank's official accounts. Carol Henderson, Meridian Trust's VP of Operations, received the wake-up call at her Westchester home. "Ma'am, we have a situation. There's a video. It's bad." By dawn, the video had reached 400,000 views. Hat Meridian Trust racism was trending nationally. The bank's Yelp page filled with one-star reviews. Their corporate Twitter mentions were a disaster. At 7:45 a.m., Carol Henderson stormed into Garrett's office, where he sat scrolling through his phone, face pale. "What the hell were you thinking?" Garrett looked up, his usual confidence cracked. "Carol, she didn't look like she had that kind of money. I mean, look at her in the video. I'm looking at a potential lawsuit, federal discrimination charges, and our stock price dropping 3% in pre-market trading." Garrett's phone buzzed. LinkedIn notification. Someone had identified him by name in a share of the viral video. Then another notification. Then another. "How did they figure out who I am?" "Your nameplate is clearly visible in the video. Genius." Carol paced behind his desk. "Legal wants to see us in 20 minutes. Public Relations is drafting a response and Marcus is flying back from the Hamptons." Marcus Donnelly, the bank's president, rarely cut his weekend short. When he did, careers usually ended. Meanwhile, across town, Naomi Rivers sat in a different kind of meeting. The conference room on the 47th floor of the Chrysler Building overlooked Manhattan like a chessboard. Her acquisition team had assembled with unusual speed. Lawyers, financial analysts, regulatory specialists, who normally needed weeks of advance notice. "Status report," she said, settling into the head chair. David, her chief financial officer, pulled up holographic displays of financial data. "We've been quietly accumulating Meridian Trust shares for 6 months through shell companies and institutional proxies. Current position 41.2%. 2%. Legal obstacles. Sarah Martinez, Senior counsel flipped through regulatory documents. The Federal Reserve requires disclosure once we hit 50%. But there's a 48-hour grace period for filing. We could move fast enough to secure control before they can respond. Cost at current market price. Acquiring the additional 9.8% would run approximately $214 million. But the viral video has spooked investors. Share price is down 11% since market open. Naomi nodded. Opportunity cost discount. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Rivers. This is Marcus Donnelly, president of Meridian Trust Bank. I believe we should discuss yesterday's unfortunate incident. Would you be available for a call? She showed the message to her team. He doesn't know, David said. No, he thinks I'm just another victim looking for a settlement. Naomi set her phone aside. Sarah, what's the timeline for a complete acquisition? If we move aggressively, 72 hours from initiation to controlling interest. But it would require whatever it requires. Do it. At Meridian Trust, the crisis deepened. The video had reached 1.2 million views. Local news stations picked up the story. Channel 7 sent a reporter to stake out the bank's headquarters. Protesters began gathering outside. Not many, maybe 15 people, but enough to force customers to walk through a gauntlet of shame to reach the entrance. Marcus Donnelly arrived at 11:30 a.m., his Hamptons tan contrasting sharply with his thunderous expression. The emergency board meeting convened in the marble-walled conference room, where oil paintings of the bank's founders looked down in patrician disappointment. Gentlemen, Marcusa began, we have a Category 5 storm on our hands. The video's been viewed over 1 million times. The hashtag is trending. Our phones are ringing off the hook with reporters, regulators, and very angry customers. Board member Elizabeth Kraft, heir to old railroad money, leaned forward. What's our exposure? Legal says. Potential civil rights lawsuit? Federal banking regulators are monitoring the situation, and our stock is down 14%. Garrett sat at the far end of the table looking like he wanted to disappear into the mahogany grain. The woman in the video, Marcus continued, Naomi Rivers? Has anyone been able to reach her? Carol Henderson cleared her throat. Tried calling the number she left on her loan application. Go straight to voicemail. Generic message. No call back. What about social media? She talking? Nothing. No Twitter, no Facebook response to the video. She's completely silent. This puzzled Marcus. Usually discrimination victims wanted to tell their story. They wanted attention, settlement money, their 15 minutes of justice. Silence suggested either she was lawyering up for a major lawsuit or sir. His assistant knocked on the conference room door. There's been a development. The viral video just hit 5 million views. And there's something else. What? Someone leaked Garrett's LinkedIn profile, home address, and his kid's school information. There are protesters outside his house. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see the crowd outside the bank had grown to about 50 people. News vans lined the street. Someone had brought a bullhorn. Marcus felt the walls closing in. In 30 years of banking, he'd weathered financial crisis, regulatory investigations, and market crashes. But he'd never faced anything like this. The swift, unforgiving judgment of viral justice. His phone rang. Unknown number. Marcus Donnelly. Mr. Donnelly, this is Naomi Rivers. The room went silent as he put the call on speaker. M. Rivers, thank you for calling. I want to personally apologize for yesterday's completely unacceptable treatment. Mr. Whitfield's behavior does not represent the values of WADA. Meridian Trust Bank. I appreciate that, Mr. Donnelly. Her voice was calm, professional, no anger, no demands. Somehow that made it worse. I'd like to discuss how we can make this right. Perhaps we could meet. I'm prepared to offer a formal apology, policy changes, and of course, we'd be happy to reconsider your loan application under proper procedures. A pause that stretched too long. I'm not interested in your apology, Marcus. I'm interested in results. What kind of results? I want to meet with your full board of directors tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock a.m. Marcus glanced around the table at confused faces. Ms. Rivers. I'm not sure that's necessary. I have full authority to tomorrow morning. Marcus, your full board, or this conversation ends. The line went dead. Board member William Ashford, descendant of the bank's founding family, spoke first. Who does she think she is? But Marcus stared at his phone, a cold realization forming in his gut. In 3 decades of crisis management, he'd learned to read people through their voices. Victims sounded angry, hurt, desperate for validation. Naomi Rivers sounded like someone who held all the cards and was simply deciding when to play them. The boardroom on Meridian Trust's 42nd floor had witnessed a century of power. Oil barons had negotiated here during the Roaring '20s. Steel magnates had carved up territories during the Great Depression. Tech billionaires had sealed deals during the dot-com boom. But none of those titans had arrived wearing a faded hoodie. Exactly 10 a.m. Naomi Rivers walked through the mahogany doors flanked by 3 people in expensive suits. The board members, 12 white men and 2 white women, representing old American money, exchanged glances as she took the seat at the foot of the long table. Marcus Donnelly sat at the head, his prepared apology speech folded neatly beside his legal pad. Ms. Rivers, thank you for coming. I'd like to begin by offering our most sincere. Before you continue, Naomi interrupted softly, I think there's something you should see. She nodded to the woman on her left, Sarah Martinez, though the board didn't know that yet. Sarah placed a single document on the polished table. The letterhead read, Notice of Controlling Interest Acquisition. Marcus picked it up, his eyes scanning the legal text. His face went through a series of expressions, confusion, disbelief, then something approaching terror. This can't be right. NR Capital Management now owns 51.7% of Meridian Trust Bank's outstanding common stock as of 9:47 a.m. this morning. The room fell silent, except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of protesters still chanting outside. Board member Elizabeth Kraft leaned forward. I'm sorry. What exactly are you saying? Sarah Martinez spoke for the first time. What Ms. Rivers is saying is that she owns this bank. Y'all work for her now. William Ashford, great-grandson of the bank's founder, stammered, That's impossible. Would have been notified of any major stock purchases. SEC regulations require disclosure at 50%. The third member of Naomi's team interjected. He was older, silver-haired, with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades navigating regulatory waters, which we filed at 9:47 a.m., 13 minutes before this meeting began. Perfectly legal. Marcus found his voice. Who are you people? Naomi stood, her sneakers silent on the Persian rug. I'm Naomi Rivers, founder and CEO of NR Capital Management. This is Sarah Martinez, my chief legal counsel, and this is Robert Davies, former Federal Reserve Chairman and current senior partner at Davies Klein & Associates. The name Davies hit the room like a physical blow. Robert Davies had regulated most of these men's banks for the better part of a decade. Over the past 6 months, Naomi continued, my firm has been quietly acquiring shares of Meridian Trust through various institutional proxies and shell companies. We'd planned to announce our position in Q3, but yesterday's interaction accelerated our timeline. Garrett Whitfield, who'd been silent in the corner, finally spoke. You can't just buy a bank overnight, Naomi turned to him. With the patience of a teacher addressing a particularly slow student. I didn't buy it overnight, Garrett. I've owned pieces of it for months. I just decided yesterday to own all of it. She walked to the windows overlooking Manhattan, her reflection ghost-like against the glass. NR Capital Management specializes in acquiring underperforming financial institutions. We've purchased and restructured 47 banks across 11 states over the past 8 years. The number 47 hung in the air like smoke. Our typical target profile, declining customer satisfaction, outdated technology, infrastructure, regulatory compliance issues. And she turned back to face the room. Institutional discrimination that creates legal liability. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. You're saying you targeted us specifically? I'm saying Meridian Trust fit our acquisition criteria perfectly? The discrimination lawsuit filed by the Rodriguez family in 2019, the FDIC citation for disparate lending practices in 2021, the 18 complaints filed with the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency over the past 3 years. She returned to her seat with fluid grace. We conduct extensive due diligence before acquisition. Your bank has been systematically discriminating against minority applicants for decades. The data is quite clear. Robert Davies opened a tablet and began reading. African American loan approval rate at Meridian Trust, 31%. Industry average, 68%. Latino approval rate, 29%. Your approval rate for white applicants with identical credit profiles, 87%. The numbers landed like hammer blows. But Davies continued, "Yesterday's incident provided us with something we didn't have before. Visual evidence of institutional bias. A viral video that demonstrates the culture that produces these statistical disparities." Elizabeth Kraft found her voice. "So this was all planned, the loan application, the video?" "No," Naomi's answer was firm. "I legitimately needed bridge financing for another acquisition. I chose to visit Meridian Trust because we were already considering purchasing it. I dressed casually because I wanted to see how your staff treated someone who did unlook like your typical client." She paused, letting that sink in. "I expected discrimination. I didn't expect it to be quite so theatrical." Garrett's face had gone white. "You set me up, Garrett. I walked into your office with a legitimate business proposal and 2.3 million reasons to approve it. You set yourself up." Marcus struggled to process what he was hearing. The woman who recorded the video, Kesha Williams, is a Howard University student who banks with you. She acted independently. We didn't know she was recording until she approached me afterward. Naomi smiled slightly, though I did encourage her to post it. The room erupted in overlapping conversations. Board members whispered urgently to each other. Someone mentioned calling lawyers. Another suggested contacting the SEC. Naomi let the chaos continue for exactly 30 seconds before raising her hand. The room fell silent. "Before anyone makes any calls, there's something else you should know." She reached into her folder and withdrew a photograph, old, slightly faded, showing a young black man in a suit standing outside this very building. "This is my father, James Rivers, brilliant civil rights attorney. Harvard Law School, Order of the Croix. In 1987, he applied for a mortgage at this bank to buy a house in Scarsdale, where he wanted to raise his family." She slid the photograph across the table toward Marcus. "He was denied, not because of his credit. He had none of your financial red flags. He was denied because the loan officer didn't think a black family belonged in that neighborhood. The loan officer's exact words, according to the complaint my father filed, were perhaps you'd be more comfortable in a more suitable area." The photograph reached Marcus. He stared at it, recognition dawning. "That loan officer," Naomi continued, "was your father, Marcus Thomas Donnelly, Senior Vice President of Residential Lending, 1982 to 1994. Marcus's hands began to shake. "My father never got his mortgage. He bought a smaller house in Mount Vernon instead. He spent the next 30 years fighting housing discrimination cases, winning settlements for hundreds of families who faced what he faced." Naomi stood again, her voice carrying the weight of generational memory. "He died 3 years ago, heart attack at his desk, working on a case against a credit union in Albany that was redlining minority neighborhoods." She paused. "He never knew I was planning to buy this bank. But he would have enjoyed knowing that his daughter owned the institution that tried to keep his family out of the neighborhood where they belonged." The silence stretched until William Ashford broke it. "So this is revenge?" "No, William. Revenge would have been liquidating the bank and selling the pieces. This is renovation." She returned to her seat, the simple motion somehow more authoritative than any theatrical gesture. "I don't want to destroy Meridian Trust. I want to fix it. Transform it from an institution that perpetuates inequality into one that builds community wealth across all demographics." Marcus found his voice again, though it came out strained. "What? What does that mean for us?" Naomi looked around the table at 14 faces that represented 127 years of institutional power. "That depends entirely on whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the past." The silence that followed stretched like a taut wire. 14 board members sat frozen, processing the complete inversion of power that had occurred in less than 10 minutes. Marcus Donnelly, who had entered this room as president of a 127-year-old institution, now faced the woman who owned it, the woman his father had humiliated 37 years ago. "I need to understand the scope of what you're proposing," he said carefully. Naomi nodded to Robert Davies, who activated a holographic display system built into the conference table. Financial data materialized in the air above the mahogany surface. Spreadsheets, charts, regulatory documents that told the story of Meridian Trust's decline in stark numerical terms. Current position, Davies began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd briefed presidents and treasury secretaries. Meridian Trust Bank holds $8.3 billion in assets. However, your return on equity has declined 17% over the past 3 years. The first chart showed a red line trending downward like a ski slope. Customer satisfaction scores 2.1 out of 5 stars. Industry average 3.8. You're hemorrhaging clients at a rate of 8% annually. Elizabeth Kraft leaned forward, her diamond bracelet catching the light. Those numbers are confidential. How did you? We've been conducting due diligence for 6 months. Oh. Sarah Martinez interrupted. Everything we're showing you came from public filings, regulatory reports, and third-party research services. Davies continued. Your mobile banking platform is 7 years behind industry standards. Your branch footprint includes 47 locations in demographically shifting neighborhoods where you've systematically underserved the emerging customer base. William Ashford's face had gone red. Now see here, we've served this community for over a century. You've served white customers for over a century, Naomi said quietly. The community has changed. Your business model hasn't. She stood and walked to the windows again, her reflection overlaying the Manhattan skyline like a ghost from the future. NR Capital doesn't acquire banks to strip them for parts. We transform them into engines of community wealth creation. Our average acquired institution sees 37% growth in assets within 18 months post-acquisition. The holographic display shifted to show success stories. Banks in Atlanta, Detroit, Phoenix, institutions that had been transformed under NR Capital's ownership. First National of Atlanta assets grew from $2.4 billion to $4.1 billion. Customer satisfaction improved from 2.6 to 4.3 stars. Most importantly, minority business lending increased by 230%. Marcus studied the data, his banking instincts wearing with his personal shock. How? By recognizing that discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's economically stupid, Naomi replied. You're turning away qualified borrowers based on unconscious bias. It's revenue walking out the door. Davies pulled up another chart. Meridian Trust's current minority business lending portfolio, $47 million. Market analysis suggests you should be lending approximately $280 million to minority-owned businesses in your geographic footprint. The number hit the room like a physical blow. $233 million in missed revenue opportunities. That's just small business lending, Sarah Martinez added. Residential mortgages show similar gaps. You're essentially redlining without calling it redlining. Carol Henderson, who had been silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke. What exactly are you proposing we do? Naomi returned to the table and sat down, her movements deliberate and controlled. 3 options for current leadership. Choose carefully. She held up one finger. Option 1, resign with dignity. Full severance packages, positive references, non-disclosure agreements that protect your reputations. You walk away quietly, and this transition happens smoothly. A second finger. Option 2, stay and embrace transformation. Accept new diversity and inclusion mandates. Submit to quarterly bias training. Report to an independent oversight committee. Your compensation becomes partially tied to measurable improvements in minority lending and customer satisfaction metrics. The third finger, option 3, fight this transition. Challenge the acquisition in court. Resist implementation of new policies. She let her hand fall to the table. I don't recommend option 3. Marcus felt compelled to ask why not. Robert Davies smiled for the first time since entering the room. Because Ms. Rivers has spent considerable time documenting your bank's discriminatory practices. The Rodriguez case. That was just the beginning. We have evidence of systematic bias spanning 2 decades. Sarah Martinez opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. 1843 loan applications from minority borrowers that were denied despite meeting or exceeding approval criteria. Email chains discussing demographic risks. Internal memos referencing cultural fit as a lending criterion. She slid the folder across the table. It's all discoverable in federal court, all admissible under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act. Garrett Whitfield, who had been shrinking into his chair, suddenly found his voice. You can't prove systematic discrimination based on isolated incidents. Naomi turned to him with the patience of a predator who knew the prey was trapped. "Garrett, yesterday you told me I didn't belong in your bank. Today I own it. I'd be very careful about what I think I can or cannot prove." She addressed the full board. The legal exposure alone is estimated at $67 million in potential settlements and fines. That's before we factor in regulatory action from the FDIC, the Federal Reserve, and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. Marcus felt the walls closing in. "You're talking about destroying careers, reputations, talking about consequences for choices," Naomi interrupted. "Choices that were made every day for decades. Choices that denied opportunities to qualified borrowers because they didn't look like the people in those oil paintings." She gestured toward the portraits of the bank's founders. "William, your great-grandfather founded this institution in 1896. Do you know what was happening in 1896? Pye versus Ferguson? Separate but equal became the law of the land. Your family built this bank during the height of American apartheid." William Ashford's face flushed deeper. "That was a different time, was it? Because yesterday your current employees were still treating black customers like they didn't belong here. Same attitudes, different century." The holographic display shifted to show real-time data. "Your stock price has dropped 22% since the video went viral. Trading volume is up 400%. Institutional investors are fleeing. Your credit rating is under review by Moody's and Standard & Poor's." Marcus stared at the numbers, watching a lifetime of work evaporate in digital red ink. However, Naomi continued, "Rapidal's acquisition announcement has stabilized the decline. Investors know our track record. They trust our ability to turn around distressed financial institutions." She leaned back in her chair, completely comfortable in what had been their seat of power minutes earlier. "So, here's how this works. You have until 5 p.m. today to choose your option. Option 1 or 2. I don't particularly care which. But if anyone chooses option 3, if anyone tries to fight this transition or challenges our acquisition, then we exercise what I call the nuclear option." Robert Davies pulled up a final document on the holographic display. Delaware Corporate Law Section 385.7, Immediate Liquidation of Assets. Meridian Trust Bank ceases to exist by close of business Friday. All employees terminated. All customer accounts transferred to acquiring institutions. 127 years of history ends in 72 hours. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pea. Elizabeth Craft's voice came out as a whisper. "You would destroy the bank rather than let us fight you." "Elizabeth, I wouldn't be destroying it. You would by choosing conflict over cooperation." Naomi's voice carried the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "I'm offering you the chance to be part of something better. A bank that actually serves its entire community. A bank that builds wealth instead of hoarding it." She stood, signaling the end of the meeting. 5 p.m.? I'll be in the president's office. My office now, waiting for your decisions." Marcus watched her walk toward the door, flanked by her advisors. At the threshold, she turned back. "Oh, and Marcus, that photograph of my father? I'm having it framed for the lobby right next to the portrait of your father. I think the contrast will be educational." The door closed behind them with a soft click that echoed like a gavel falling. In the silence that followed, 14 people who had entered the room as masters of their universe sat staring at holographic data that told the story of their obsolescence. The old guard was ending. The question now was whether they would exit with dignity or be swept away by forces they did never bothered to understand. Outside the 42nd floor windows, Manhattan spread out in all directions, indifferent to the corporate revolution that had just concluded. But in bank branches across the city, in communities that had been systematically excluded from capital access for generations, change was about to arrive with the force of long-delayed justice. At 4:47 p.m., 13 minutes before Naomi's deadline, Marcus Donnelly knocked on the door of what was no longer his office. "I'd like to discuss option 2, he said. 6 months later, Meridian Trust Bank looked nothing like the institution that had humiliated Naomi Rivers. The marble lobby now displayed 2 photographs side by side. On the left, Thomas Donnelly, Senior Vice President of Residential Lending, 1982 to 1994. On the right, James Rivers, Civil Rights Attorney, holding his rejected mortgage application outside the same building in 1987. The contrast was intentional. Powerful, educational. Marcus Donnelly stood before these photographs every morning now, daily reminder of the institution he was helping to rebuild. His title had changed from president to chief operating officer. His salary had decreased by 30%. His purpose had increased immeasurably. The morning metrics, sir, his new assistant, a young Latina woman named Sofia Gutierrez, handed him the daily diversity report. Minority business, lending up 187% from pre-acquisition levels. Customer satisfaction scores, 4.22 out of 5 stars. Employee diversity, 43% minority staff across all levels, including management. The transformation hadn't been gentle. Garrett Whitfield was gone, terminated for cause on day 3 of the new regime. His departure had been swift and absolute. No severance, no references, no golden parachute to cushion his fall. He now worked at a community credit union in Queens, making $42,000 a year processing small business loan applications. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Carol Henderson had chosen option 2, embracing the transformation with the enthusiasm of someone who discovered her moral compass after decades of following profit margins. She now headed the newly created Community Investment Division, personally reviewing every minority business loan application. 7 other executives had resigned rather than submit to the new diversity mandates. Their replacements came from community development, financial institutions, credit unions, mission-driven banks that had spent years serving the customers Meridian Trust had ignored. But the real change was systematic, embedded in technology and policy. The Meridian Equity Initiative launched with $50 million in dedicated capital for minority business loans. Interest rates were set below market for qualifying borrowers. Approval criteria were standardized, removing subjective cultural fit assessments. The bias detection AI system went live in every branch. Conversations between loan officers and customers were analyzed in real time for discriminatory language, tone patterns, and approval disparities. Any flags triggered immediate supervisor review and mandatory bias training. Anonymous reporting became seamless through the Fair Banking Watch mobile app. Customers could document discriminatory treatment with video, audio, and written complaints that went directly to an independent oversight committee. The most revolutionary change was transparency. Quarterly diversity reports became public documents. Loan approval rates by demographic were published on the bank's website. Customer satisfaction surveys included specific questions about discriminatory treatment. "Ma'am," Sophia interrupted Marcus's daily review. "The Community Advisory Board meeting starts in 10 minutes. The advisory board was Naomi's masterpiece. 12 community leaders representing every demographic group Meridian Trust had historically excluded. They met monthly to review lending practices, suggest policy changes, and hold the bank accountable to its transformation promises. Marcus walked to the conference room, where Maria Santos, a Latina small business owner, chaired the meeting. "Good morning, Marcus. The Rodriguez family wanted me to thank you personally. The restaurant expansion loan was approved yesterday." Marcus nodded. The Rodriguez family, the same family whose discrimination lawsuit had been part of NR Capital's due diligence. Their loan had been denied 3 times under the old regime. Under the new system, they qualified easily. "Their credit profile was always strong," he replied. "We just needed better eyes to see it." The meeting covered the usual agenda: lending statistics, customer feedback, policy recommendations, but today included something special. "I have an announcement," Maria said. "The National Community Reinvestment Coalition has selected Meridian Trust for the Outstanding Community Impact Award. First time in our bank's history." Applause filled the room. Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of banking. Pride that wasn't connected to profit margins. After the meeting, he walked to Naomi's office, the president's suite that had been Marcus for 12 years. She was reviewing acquisition proposals for their next target, a savings and loan in Birmingham with a familiar pattern of discriminatory lending. "The Alabama deal?" he asked. "Similar profile to what we had here. Declining customer base, regulatory issues, systematic bias against minority borrowers." She looked up from her laptop. "Want to lead the transformation team?" Marcus considered the offer. 6 months ago, he would have seen it as exile, being sent to fix someone else's mess. Now he understood it as opportunity to be honored. The changes at Meridian Trust rippled outward. Other banks began voluntarily adopting similar diversity measures, afraid of becoming the next viral discrimination video. Business schools added NR Capital's transformation model to their curricula. Congressional hearings referenced the Meridian model as a template for banking reform. But the most meaningful change was smaller, personal. Kesha Williams, the Howard student who'd filmed Garrett's discrimination, now worked at Meridian Trust as a community outreach coordinator. Her job was connecting with young people, explaining banking services, helping them build credit and financial literacy. She'd started a TikTok series called Banking 101 that had 400,000 followers. Her videos showed young Black and Latino customers getting approved for business loans, buying their first homes, building generational wealth. The comments section of those videos told the real story of change. Applied for a car loan at Meridian Trust today. Loan officer was respectful, professional, got approved on the spot. My daughter is starting a catering business. Meridian Trust gave her the startup capital no other bank would consider. First time I've ever felt comfortable walking into a bank. These were the touching stories, the real-life stories that mattered most. It's not the corporate metrics or regulatory compliance scores, but the human experiences of people who had been systematically excluded from financial opportunity. The viral video that started everything now had 12 million views. But more importantly, it had spawned thousands of response videos. Black stories of people sharing their own experiences with banking discrimination, and increasingly stories of institutions that had changed. Change that could be measured in more than numbers, could be seen in the faces of customers who walked into Meridian Trust branches and were treated with dignity, respect, and recognition of their economic potential. At the 6-month anniversary of the acquisition, Naomi Rivers stood in the same spot where Garrett Whitfield had humiliated her. The marble floors gleamed under the same crystal chandeliers, but everything else had transformed. She thought about her father, who had died believing that institutional change happened through lawsuits and legislation. He would have been amazed to see change happening through acquisition and transformation. The McDonald's application that Garrett had mockingly offered her was now framed in her office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that someone's attempt to diminish your worth might be the universe's way of showing you how to change an entire system. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Birmingham SNL board approved the acquisition. When do we start? She smiled and typed back. Tomorrow, there's work to do. 2 years after a McDonald's job application landed on a mahogany desk as an act of humiliation, the banking industry had fundamentally shifted. NR Capital Management had acquired 11 more financial institutions across 7 states. Each acquisition followed the same pattern. Identify systematic discrimination, document the legal liability, purchase controlling interest, then transform the institution from the inside out. The Meridian model had become required reading at Harvard Business School, Wharton, and Stanford. Congressional testimony by Naomi Rivers led to new federal guidelines for bias detection in lending. The Fair Banking Watch app had been downloaded 2.3 million times, but the most powerful change was cultural. Discrimination lawsuits against banks had dropped by 34% nationally. Not because discrimination had ended, but because institutions were proactively addressing bias before it reached the courtroom. The fear of becoming the next viral video, the next acquisition target, had motivated widespread reform. Garrett Whitfield had become an unlikely symbol. His name was Googled over 50,000 times monthly, mostly by banking professionals, checking to see if their own discriminatory moments had been recorded. The Whitfield effect entered business school vocabulary as a case study in how individual bias could destroy institutional value. Meanwhile, Garrett processed small business loans at Queens Community Credit Union, where his supervisor was a young Black woman named Jasmine, who had once been denied a car loan at Meridian Trust. The irony was complete, circular, educational. Marcus Donnelly had found unexpected fulfillment leading transformation teams across the South. His work in Birmingham had saved Southern Trust and Loan from federal intervention. His reputation had transformed from corporate climber to redemption specialist. Every morning, I wake up knowing the work I'm doing matters, he told a reporter from Forbes. I spent 30 years maximizing shareholder value. Now I'm building community wealth. The second career is infinitely more satisfying. Kesha Williams had graduated from Howard with job offers from Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan Chase, and Credit Suisse. She chose to stay at Meridian Trust, launching a financial literacy program that had reached 47,000 young people across New York City. Her TikTok following had grown to 1.2 million. Her videos showed the faces of change: teenage entrepreneurs getting their first business loans, immigrant families buying homes, grandmothers opening savings accounts for grandchildren they'd never believed would have generational wealth. These were the life stories that mattered, not the corporate metrics or stock prices, but the human moments when systematic exclusion transformed into systematic inclusion. The original viral video had been viewed 23 million times across all platforms, but its legacy lived in the response videos. Thousands of touching stories from people who had experienced banking discrimination, and increasingly stories of institutions that had changed. Naomi Rivers kept 3 items on her desk in the corner office of NR Capital Management's Manhattan headquarters: her father's rejected mortgage application from 1987, the McDonald's job application Garrett Whitfield had mockingly offered her, and a photograph from last month's National Community Development Banking Conference, where she'd received the Lifetime Achievement Award for financial inclusion. The contrast between humiliation and transformation, between exclusion and ownership, reminded her daily that systematic change was possible when moral clarity met strategic power. Her phone rang. Another banking executive, another institution facing discrimination scandals, another opportunity to choose between destruction and reconstruction. This is Naomi Rivers. Miss Rivers, my name is Patricia, CEO of First National Bank of Denver. We have a situation, and I think we need to talk. Naomi smiled, reaching for her legal pad. After 2 years of transforming the financial industry, one acquisition at a time, she'd learned to recognize the sound of institutional fear mixed with desperate hope for redemption. Tell me about your situation, Patricia, because sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't anger or litigation or viral videos. Sometimes it's excellence. Sometimes it's strategic acquisition. Sometimes it's becoming the system you want to change, then changing it from within. Sometimes the best revenge is ownership. Your voice matters in fighting systematic discrimination. Have you witnessed bias in banking, lending, or business services? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience could help identify institutions that need accountability. Stories like Naomi's remind us that individual excellence can drive systematic change. When we document discrimination, demand transparency, and support businesses that practice inclusion, we create the conditions for transformation. Hit that subscribe button to see more real-life stories of strategic justice. Share this video with someone who needs to know that systematic exclusion can become systematic change. And remember, someone else's attempt to diminish your worth might be the universe showing you how to change their entire world. It's because in the end, the most powerful response to "you don't belong here" is simple. Actually, I own here. Now, what's your story of overcoming systematic bias? We're listening. Behind every headline is a human story. At Beat Stories, we go deeper, where emotion meets evidence and drama reveals the system. If this story made you pause, reflect, or feel something, don't forget to subscribe. There's more to come.